Welcome everybody to the next session in the Capacity Building Hub, and I would like to invite you to the session, How Can We Green Skills for a Just Transition? My name is Laura Schmidt, I'm the skills specialist of the International Labour Organization, and I have the pleasure to present you and moderate you this panel. I'll start with the lady on the right, is Ms. Hae-Kyun Chun. She's the Skills and Employability Advisor at the ILO in Geneva with a focus on green skills and green jobs. Then to my right, Mr. Robert Marinkovic from the International Organization of Employers, Employers Federation. Then Mr. Just Geary from the Rail and Maritime Transport Union, New Zealand. And Mr. Shamir Shehab from Bangladesh. He's the winner of a Skills Challenge Fund that the ILO has been jointly with the ISDB run here, and his project idea from Bangladesh has been awarded a grant of $50,000 and been picked the first choice out of over 150 applications. So before I start with this panel, let me break down maybe the topic a bit. So we're talking about how can green skills help for a just transition. Yesterday I've moderated a panel and we received questions online, and one of the questions was, what is a green skill? And I was like, that's a weird question to ask if you're at COP27. I assume you should know what green skills are. But then I've been thinking about this, and actually it's not a weird question at all to ask, because is a green skill that I am aware that I should separate waste? Is a green skill that I know how to maintain electronic motors? Is a green skill that I know that I shouldn't leave my lights on when I leave the house, or I should not throw rubbish on the floor? Or is a green skill that I come up with innovative business ideas, how to save water or how to turn plastic into clothes? So I think we're talking a lot about different things when we're talking green skills. We're talking about climate education on the one hand, all the way to high-tech skills about engineering, waste management, water and sanitation. So I think I'm very excited to hear from trade unions, employers, and entrepreneurs, and the UN advisor what they think green skills can do for a just transition. And if I look at the second title in the session, a just transition, why do we actually need a just transition? What's a just transition as well? We've seen various studies from multiple sources, ITF, the ILO, the World Bank, that a green transition will bring about a lot of jobs, and we're talking about 105 to 130 to 140 million new jobs. These are the figures that different studies are bringing about. But the downside, which not a lot of people want to talk about, is that we will also face considerable job losses in certain industries, fossil fuels, coal, like mining industry. It's not only that this green transition will bring about positive change, there will also be substantial job losses coming along with it. And that leaves me to the question, a just transition is needed, because to make a transition happen, we need to retrain, reskill, and find ways how these people are able to maintain in the labor market. So with that kind of setting the scene, I would jump right into the panel discussion and start with my first question to Hae-Kyun. So what do you think the green transition, how do you think the green transition will affect the way we work in the future? What kind of skills would we need to have to navigate a green career? And how rapidly are these skills changing in the world?
Thank you, Laura, for the question. So I think to tackle climate change, it's very obvious that we have to rethink how we design, how we produce, and how we deliver different goods and services. And not only that, we also have to change our behaviors in terms of consumptions. And what does that all mean? These changes are changing the new skills requirements. meaning we need new skills for the construction workers, salesperson, engineers. For example, the motor mechanics, they will have to learn how to repair the electric vehicles. In case of construction workers, now they will have to learn how to install solar panels, geothermal heating systems. In the agriculture sector, the farmers will have to learn how to do organic farming. So you can name it, and there's tons of lists of the changing skills for different occupations. And to navigate this green transition, I think what the workers is needed in the labor market is a good mix of different types of skills. Laura, you just mentioned about what is green skills. What do we need as skills for this transition? I think, first of all, it's clear that we need technical skills that is specific to the occupation, such as skills related wind turbine design, installation, or solar panel installation. Second, we also need foundational skills, which is literacy, numeracy, and I think in this 21st century, we can also add digital and climate literacy, which becomes the basis for any work and any learning. Last but not least, core skills. At the ILO, we call it core skills. There are flies around here. And it's called soft skills. Communication and teamwork skills are important. And this is important because it's portable. We can transfer from one occupation to another, one sector to another, so it enhances the employability of workers. And in this rapidly evolving world of work, where we are also living longer life, yet the net zero is demanding urgent and quick changes in our consumption, production, and delivery of goods and services. I think we not only have to change the way we work, but also the way we learn. We should be moving away from the concept that our learning ends at the compulsory education and training to rather more lifelong learning. And we need to cultivate the culture that to the workforces that this notion of lifelong learning. And also we will have to prepare our young people that learning doesn't end just at the compulsory level, but it has to be a continuous journey that will be accompanying in your career. So yeah, I would like to end here with that note. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Heike. And I think you mentioned the transportation sector. So I'm turning to my left for my next question. I think transport is a key sector for a green transition. So from your perspective and the perspective of the Transport Union, what do you see as changes in the transport sector in the context of a green transition? How would it affect workers and their skills? And what do you think is important to support workers throughout a good transition?
Thank you for the question. It is no secret. It is no secret that the transport accounts for 15% of emissions globally, and we all know that emission targets will not be met without addressing emissions from all modes of transport, including shipping and public transport. To get there, we must fast-track the energy transition with sustainable and alternative fuels, including electrification of the rail. With transport, there is no one shoe fits all solutions, which is why within ITF, within unions, is we're creating a transport sector specific policies for just transition plans. I do want to mention that as a young worker, the role of the young transport worker, how they are affected, and the green skills needed for just transition. Young workers face an uncertain future due to precarious and informal employment that is often found in transport sector. And there must be a solid pathway which we can transform the industry over the long term. The things which needs to happen in order to green skills for a just transition, which I would see, is the national governments and the local authorities to adapt youth employment policies for green jobs in line with their climate plans. Unions should demand that training funds are available in the workplaces, within the industries, and in the government's budget to provide young workers with quality apprenticeships, work-based trainings, reskilling, upskilling, and other sources of arrangements, within occupation shifts. Also provide young workers with political education, which can bring awareness and which can bring also soft skills to deal with a continuously changing the labor environment and support their mental health and well-being. Young workers needs to be redeployed, and at no point they need to be put in a competition with other workers. Support precarious young informal workers and transitioning towards formal and decent and safe work while providing security, social protection, ensuring fundamentals human and workers' right. Organize and demand and just transition committees to make just transition, collective bargaining, and agreement at the company and secretarial and national level. Young transport workers are ready to lead the change, and a just transition will only happen if we address the current inequalities now and demand the green skills required. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really liked your point about training funds, that we need training funds so young people can be retrained. You said public training funds. What about the private sector? Robert, what role can businesses play in defining and implementing climate action? And what opportunities and challenges do businesses see in engaging with good green agenda and also looking at green skills? What do they need?
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to be here and have this very interesting discussion. I would just like to preamble by saying, ILO's work in green skills is very interesting and impressive. We've been working with the ILO for quite a while now, and for us as global representatives of employers, green skills is also a priority topic. We see it as a kind of, catalyst for just transition and for a smooth and optimal transition towards more sustainable economies. As it comes to the role of business and employers, first of all, I'd like to say that the private sector is very diverse globally, right? But companies that succeed, they recognize the value of human talent and investing in people and creating an environment where they can keep the best talent and foster it over time, right? So first of all, lifelong learning and training opportunities on the job are very important. Second of all, apprenticeships and actual apprenticeships that, are paid and then lead to a job, not one-offs or unpaid internships, etc. But actual apprenticeships are very important and can be a very good way for companies and employers to create a skilled workforce and provide them a decent and high-quality job. Sometimes it's not very easy to do. There's many different, contexts and examples across the world. Switzerland, for example, is often used as a kind of best practice in this case because they have a very developed system of apprenticeships, collaboration between government, private sector, and education institutions. To me, one of the key elements is this coordination, right? Because one thing we talk a lot about is skills gaps and skills mismatches. Those usually end up happening when there's not enough coordination between the labor markets and the other stakeholders, and then you end up getting some discrepancies. And sometimes it's complicated, right? Because we're usually in a kind of, free market liberal economy, which is supposed to, magically solve itself. But then sometimes there's a bit of discrepancy, right? Like I feel we're all familiar with the, inflation of university diplomas. Some much more popular than others, whereas, it's not guaranteed that jobs for those diplomas are there at the same time. So, even in my case, I studied environmental science. It wasn't super easy to find a job straight after. Nobody really told me that when I was signing up. But the other thing I wanted to point out was the importance of basically, training on the job, and then coordination between the different stakeholders, and for companies to recognize this importance, first of all. And second of all, also, I wanted to highlight the fact that the importance of skills in labor mobility, right? I think that's a huge issue when we talk about the green transition, just transition, different sectors being phased out, other sectors growing. And this is a normal component of the globalized world, right? I mean, many people move for jobs across the world. My grandparents went to work in Germany from Croatia because, you know, Germany's economy was growing. They needed many workers in particular categories. Croatia had good workers in those categories. They happily went over to work on different things in you know, pretty good conditions. This happened in an orderly way because Germany and Croatia had agreements, and they set up, you know, avenues for those workers to go and then come back after a while, etc. So I think the labor mobility element is quite important, especially in the context of just transition, right? Some jobs will disappear, others will appear, but the location and the time of that is the crucial element, right? If you have a coal mining community in a particular region and it has 50,000 people living there, if that coal operation is phased out, that community will either have to disappear and those people will have to go somewhere else, or there will have to be some sort of structured economic diversification plan which can ensure that those people stay there, right? So in both of those cases, it's important to have collaboration, to discuss and to plan, and to figure out how those people can either be retrained or how they can find similar jobs in another location. And again, it's in the interest of everybody to do this correctly. And I would just like to wrap up for now with the importance of education itself, right? I think that's one thing that it's quite challenging and we often overlook it. I mean, we've all been to school, I hope, and we all know that sometimes, you know, some people are more into pushing themselves and educating themselves than others, right? And this is also a cultural element. Sometimes the institutions that provide education can't actually ensure 100% that, you know, people get the skills that they're offering, because sometimes people are just not in the mood for actually getting those skills. And this is, you know, this is a question of culture. This is a question of parenting. This is a question of, you know, education starting from an early age and having high quality, good education, and then ensuring that, you know, the rates of success and ensuring that you keep going, you keep building on the foundations from the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I liked it. We talked a bit about, Heikyon talked about education systems, we talked about employers' perspectives, but also the need for education system, a specific sector and what work has needs. But very often we forget the agency and the role of the youth themselves in a green transition. What can they bring to the table? What is the agency of young people when it comes to green skills and green transition? So, Shamir, you're working very closely with young people in Bangladesh and you're trying to empower them and trying to work with them on green skills. Could you tell us a bit more about what you're doing, what role the youth plays, and what you've seen in your project in Bangladesh so far?
Thank you very much, Laura. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning and good evening, depending on which part of the world you are joining from, especially those who are joining on the online. So my name is Shamir, I'm from Bangladesh, and if I may start by asking you a question, how many of you have solar home system at your home or in your workplace? I see roughly 5-6 of you. I don't know how's your experience. So I was speaking to one of my relatives who is living in the countryside. And what the story that she told me, that she was having problem with her solar home system. You know, in the countryside like Bangladesh, I mean, electricity is a big issue, and often often blackouts, and people do have solar home system these days. So she had to wait for 2 weeks to get the guy to come and repair the system so that she can reuse it. So I don't know how's your experience of dealing with if you have an issue with solar home system. So the question that Laura posed to me, I will base it in the context of Bangladesh, but the audience I see over here, I think some of you might actually relate back to your country. So Bangladesh has a demography, very young demography. More than 60% of its population is below the age of 45. It's a very young population. But also the unemployment rate is very, very high. Official statistics is around 15%, but unofficially it might actually way higher. And in the backdrop of COVID-19, it's actually, many research would say it shoot up more than 20%. So see, this is a very, very big issue. And at the same time, some of you know that Bangladesh is actually the hotbed of climate change, where climate change is not just a futuristic thing. It's happening right now, affecting lives. And so Bangladesh also has made a commitment, very big commitment actually, to transition to like almost 40% by 2050 to renewable energy. So how does that take place? The real scenario in Bangladesh is not that very optimistic. So Bangladesh government set a goal of 10% renewable energy by 2020. It missed it by the margin of 7.5 to 8%. It's a huge gap, right? I think some of you in the audience can relate to that as well. It's not all about promises, talk, but what's happening on the real ground. So studies and research basically showing that there is not enough people, skilled manpower in the renewable energy who could actually make that transition happen. So I think is even if the commitments, some of the commitments in this COP and the previous commitments, if they are met, if they are realized, if countries like Bangladesh, LDC countries get this money, what next? Do you have that infrastructure, people skilled, upskilled, and reskilled to make that transition happen? I think many of you probably would agree with me, the response would not be that positive. So I think that's where comes young people. The reason I will briefly explain why this is important. See, venturing out, doing something new is a lot of undertaking of risk. And I mean, especially young people often can undertake that risk and venture out and do new things. So I think three things that need to happen in Bangladesh, in many other LDCs countries. First of all, it's not about all promises and commitment, talk. You really need to follow up with the investment. And where that investment need to be going? The second point is in many LDC countries, you have these technical and vocational institutions. They have been following the old kind of curriculum, as well as because the way the economy was operating, it's not, I mean, the curriculum was to meet that old demand. But of course, if we talk about just transition, green transitions, there has to be, I mean, you can't do these things with the old skills, right? So these people need to be trained, equipped with skills that's required in the green transition. So I think the TVET institution need to upgrade their curriculum. Government need to make more investment over there. And then I think that's the way forward too. I think I will finish shortly with my last point. That is, as a young organization, we do the basic what Keung was saying, the education and literacy part. Making people, what are the challenges? What are the opportunities? We can tell them, here you go. Here are some recycling opportunities out there. I do a pilot in a small scale, but what happens next? Am I able to scale it up to a level where impact is really visible and making a difference on the ground? So I think that's where the different stakeholders, private sector need to come in, government need to come in, organization like ILO and ISTP, where I was part of a study and panel, was supporting one of my projects, so I can come in and play a role there. So I think I'll stop there with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Samir. And you mentioned TVET as one of the important aspects to retrain and also initially train young people. So technical and vocational training is key, but very often in the education system, sometimes a bit treated as a stepchild. Higher education, basic education in a lot of countries are in the focus of the government, whereas TVET education is often seen as a bit as a neglected stepchild. However, if we're looking at a lot of the professions and the occupations that need upgrading, that through a green transition will change, TVET actually becomes quite at the core of what we should be looking at. So, Hai-Kyun, on that note, your department in Geneva has developed a new tool on greening TVET and skills development. It's just been launched this year. It's in the piloting phase. But can you tell us a bit more about the tool and the piloting that you've done so far?
Thank you. Well, yeah, as rightly mentioned, I think greening TVET can play such a great role in not only supporting the transformation of the green transformation, but also leading the changes by equipping the students and trainees with the right skills and relevant skills. With the ILO's global research based on 32 countries, we have found common challenges of TVETs in many low and middle income countries. First, many lack systematic and coordinated processes for greening TVET. Second, as mentioned by Shamir, a lot of the TVETs have difficulty actually meeting the needs of the demand of the labor market. Third, because of the lack of stakeholder engagement, social partners and those who have high stake in greening agenda are not involved for updating and for designing the competency standard and curricula. Last, another important challenge is because of the lack of funding, because of the lack of infrastructure, there's a less funding and investment for teachers and trainers and the materials that should be available for TVET. So in this context, the ILO has looked at what are the needs for the TVET, and we were thinking then how can we bridge that gap from what to do to how to do. And that's how we came up with this tool, Greening TVET and Skills Development. And we actually launched a few weeks ago. It's quite fresh, new tool that you can check out on our website. And it's actually built on various approaches that we have seen by other international organizations such as UNESCO, UNEVOC. And also at the same time, it's based on various ILO's project experiences. And the tool has 10 sections where we provide step-by-step how-to guidance on how we can develop or design competency standards, or if you like, you can call it occupational standard, depending on the countries, and the curricula, which should be tuned to the needs of the industry, which should be also based on the skills anticipation system. And also we have guidance on how we can support the practices to better deliver the training itself and assessment to support more greener learning. And we also looked at how we can capacitate the teachers and trainers. So we have a guidance on how we can equip the teachers and trainers with the up-to-date knowledge, such as on green technologies, the new green agenda, as well as skills to apply different pedagogies and assessment in their teaching. And also we looked at not only the contents matter, but also the physical environment where the teaching and learning takes place is important to contribute to the development of the behavior change and environment awareness. So there's a section on how we can make the campus and schools more greener. And moreover, as enterprises play a key role in this agenda, we have a section on how we can sensitize enterprises. And I think it was mentioned several times by other panelists that enterprises are the one who can inform this labor and market intelligence, our skills anticipation on what are the changing demand in the labor market in this context of green transition. And they are the one who will utilize, who will offer the chances for the students and trainees to utilize their knowledge and skills that they learn throughout their education and training. So we also have a guidance on how we can sensitize the enterprises through this process. Last but not least, we have also a section on how we can support the greening of skills for the informal economy, as informal economy is an important part of the economy in mostly low and middle income countries. So the tool so far has been piloted in several countries. For example, in Zimbabwe, the tool came in when they already had developed 5 different new curricula on renewable energy sector and agriculture sector. So this tool has consolidated the process of training the teachers and also TVET institutional action plan development. And in case of Ghana, we use this tool to support different sector skills bodies so that they can come up with the visions and goals for their respective sectors in the context of green transition. And also we have provided some coaching programs for countries like Cambodia, Thailand, and the Philippines, where we supported them to use how to use this tool step by step from A to Z. And also it was a process to capacitate the stakeholders who are involved in this process by learning by doing. And also the tool, as we were developing the tool, the piloting activities happened in parallel, so meaning that the piloting activities provided information and feedback to improve the tool itself. So now we have the complete full version that is available. And in a nutshell, this tool is designed to be action-oriented and learning, and it's designed to support countries and also more broader stakeholders, including policymakers, social partners, industry, education and training providers, and I think we also should involve civil society in this green agenda, that they can take stock of where they stand in terms of greening TVET and skills development together and focus on areas where they need to improve. And we believe that this practical tool will improve and help us understand how we can better design and develop and implement this greening TVET agenda at all country contexts and support the transformation of education and training for a just and green transition. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Aiken. The IOE has different employers' organizations as members. So can you maybe tell us a bit more about how, as IOE, have you helped different employers' organizations in a green transition? Can you give us maybe some examples what these employers' organizations have done? And maybe also a bit looking into the future, what would be your goals as an IOE representative on the green agenda be, how you could in the future support employers' federations?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the question. And very glad to hear about this new tool from the ILO. I'd like to hear more about it later on. For us, yeah, like I said, this is a priority topic. IOE, we have over 150 members in over 140 countries. So it's a big network, a very diverse network. Our members are, ranging from big to small. Some are much more engaged on the skills agenda than others. But one of our main missions is capacity building and engaging them on some issues like this one. For example, we have recently launched a project with Microsoft, and this is another element I wanted to mention earlier on, is that when talking about the green transition and green skills, I think it's also important to link it with the digital transition and digital skills, because in many ways they're interrelated and we'll need both in the future. So that's one thing I'd like to see a bit more of in the future, for example. But yeah, we have a project with Microsoft. We're partnering with them to work in 5 LDC countries with our members there on providing digital skills to young people in those countries. So that's one concrete example. Another one I can tell you about is that this year, actually, at this COP, we're going to be launching an Employers Alliance for Green Skills, mainly for African countries. So we will have to start with 5 or 6 of our African members, one of which is Business Unity South Africa, one of which is the Moroccan Federation of Employers, the Federation of Egyptian Industries. So we're partnering with some of our members on promoting skills anticipation and planning. The idea is to, first of all, provide them with support and capacity building, and on the other hand, to engage with them so that they can collaborate with their government and start focusing much more on skills planning and mapping. Another example that we can mention is, for example, our Indian member, the Confederation of Indian Industry, is quite strong in this topic. They have, they have skills councils where they engage with the government to plan things. They have training institutions. They have educational centers. They have different projects where they train some of their members. So depending on the employer's organization, this is quite an active topic. Our Spanish member, for example, is very active in just transition generally, and in engaging with the government and trade unions on just transition plans and converting workers to other industries. So those are just some of the ones I wanted to mention. Also, I think it's relevant to mention the Green Jobs for Youth Pact here that the ILO recently launched, and I'm happy to say we're one of the official constituents of the ILO, so we get to work together on a lot of these important projects. So ILO partnered with LinkedIn. LinkedIn has been ramping up their engagement in the skills space, and they're, by their nature, they're a kind of learning platform. They have a whole host of courses and a whole host of data that they can analyze and explore in this context. So yeah, I'll stop there with the examples, but for the future, I think, like I said, it's important to link it up with the digital. And for us, the priority at the end of the day is the first thing you can do is measure, right? I mean, in South Africa, when they signed the Just Transition Partnership last year, one of the first things our members did with another business association is to launch a research project to analyze the implications of this transition, So how many workers would be involved, would be impacted, what kind of jobs do they have right now, what kind of jobs would they be able to find, what kind of skill profiles do they have, et cetera, et cetera. And just to wrap up, just straight after this event, there's another event in the same space that's also on skills with an interesting partner. So,
thank you very much, Robert. Now that we heard from the Employers Federation side, let me go back to the trade unions, because sometimes I think a bit of the stereotype is, and you're totally breaking that stereotype as a young person being part of a trade union, is that topics like green transition are not trendy for trade unions, and that sometimes it's most about wages and social protection, but that these future-looking topics are maybe sometimes not on the top of your agenda. What would you say to this? And how would your specific organization from New Zealand, as a trade union in transport, deal with the topic of green transition and green skills? Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. It is one of the problems and an opportunity as well, which I see as a trade unionist. And if I talk about New Zealand, in New Zealand, the just transition is picking up very quickly within rail, and people have realized that the green jobs and green skills is required going into future. So we are at the transitioning phase right now. What I would say is that the biggest challenge for the trade unions when it comes down to just transition is that it needs to be inclusive of the workers. The workers' voice needs to be at the core of the transition. And if that doesn't happen, I think so it creates a problem where there's a fear of job security and job loss. And that actually slows down the process of the transition process. I've got a couple of really good examples where the just transition just went smoothly and went perfectly, and some of the places where some of the other projects it didn't. And so we were moving from paper to the digitalized ticketing and for the metro, passenger metro. And that went smoothly because everybody understood what the process is, and there was a high engagement committee was created where the workers' voice were represented on the committee, and it went well smoothly. But it doesn't work very well when, again, I'm going to emphasis on this, that when the workers are not part of the conversation, if they have no voice in that transition, I think so that's where the problem occurs, and I think so that's where that perception comes in that trade union sometimes hesitate to have that transition. It's not the transition is not there, we don't support the transition. It's always that we want it to be inclusive part of the conversation. We wanted to represent the workers' voice on the table. We wanted to make sure there's a social security, there's a job security for the workers. And like when we moved from diesel engines in New Zealand to the electrification for rail, it was a huge project, and that required a big transition where people need to be reskilled, upskilled, or redeployed if they cannot fit on those areas. So What we did was one of the solutions which we find in New Zealand is we call it HPHE, which is high engagement, high performance methods. So within those methods, or within those dynamics, you have tripartite agreements, or depends how many parties are there. Everybody gets a voice on the table, and it's not based on consultation; it's based on consensus. So that's changes the game, and what it does is it provides workers a voice to be on the table, raise their concern, and acknowledges that the transition needs to happen and actually helps with the transition.
Thank you. And I have one last question for the panelists, and then I will probably open it to the floor for 2 to 3 questions from the audience, if anyone has. My last question is to Shamir. So your initiative, Empowering Youth on Green Transition in Bangladesh. You said Bangladesh is a country which is already severely hit by climate change. So how do young people feel about it? Are they keen to be involved in this green transition process? Do they see it as part of a responsibility towards their livelihood and towards their country? And what did you wish to see more from international actors and actors in general to support these young people?
No, thank you very much, Laura. My example, the organization that I represent here, and there are many other youth-led organizations out there in Bangladesh already doing what they could do actually on the field. And so as I briefly responded in my first question as well, that when it comes to young people, there are certain limit to what they could do actually. So the first part, probably the education and awareness, is what they could easily do, but how do you take it to the next stage? So that's where I think the questions that you posed to me, what else that do we need? Of course, we need to work with the government to get their support, and also I think private sector here can come and play a very important role, especially supporting youth organization like us to enable them to make sure that some of the projects that they are doing, they can actually take it to the next level and can have impact on the ground. And I would just very briefly also share the projects that what we actually going to do with support from the ILO that might give an example of what youth organization could do. So see, the pace of transition to renewable energy or green economy, of course, it has been very slow. We need to go fast. But also is posing some challenges that we need to think before the challenges actually come and hit us. What is that? I'd be a bit provocative here. So see, in Bangladesh, the solar home system started getting deployed in early 2000. And there are like 6 million solar home systems in Bangladesh. Think about it. In many countries, the population is probably 15 to 20 million. But in Bangladesh alone, there are 6 million solar home systems. There are between 2 to 4 million, we call it easy bikes, electric vehicles, that runs on electricity, basically. And they... millions of people every day actually commute on those. So each of these systems have a lifespan of around 20 to 25 years. The best solar home system that is available in the market probably have a lifespan of around 25 to 30 years. What's going to happen with these solar panels after they come to end of their life? So is posing in countries like Bangladesh serious health hazard. So there has been a big discussion back in my country going on. In certain vegetables in Bangladesh, they have found the presence of heavy metals. That means lead, cadmium, and chromium. And so in Bangladesh, since there is no infrastructure for setting up recycling system, some of these solar home systems are discarded here and there. And in that process, they are actually going to contaminate the soil, water, and so on, and then coming to our food systems. So the projects that we are going to undertake actually, we will train and empower young people to identify what are the opportunities that are out there in the value chain of these solar home systems, and they can actually recycle these decommissioned solar home system and EV batteries. So I think that's probably response to some of the questions that what would be the next? I mean, we can do a pilot prototype to really take it to the scales. We definitely know we will have to work with the private sector, government, and other stakeholders to make that happen and make the impact more visible on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask if there is a question from the audience to the panel. If so, there is a second mic. It'd be lovely if you could introduce or just say very quickly who you are, and then maybe if you have a specific panelist in mind, point or say the name. If not, I'm sure they will tell you.
Hi, I'm Mahmouda from Bangladesh. So I worked with an NGO which is called Sajida Foundation. So at Sajida, we are giving green skills trainings at the rural communities level, as a lot of migration is in these regions, and we need to equip these migrating communities with the green skills needed for green industry. So my question is, how do we get the industry to recognize this training in green skills workers and recruit people who have this training? And how do we get government to recognize it? And I have another question, especially for Samir, as he is from Bangladesh. Like you already mentioned that government and non-government organizations should support to the organization who are working for youth development. So the question is, what kind of initiative should be taken beside training by government and private institutions to ensure youth involvement in green growth? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would probably give Robert, if you want, a chance for the first question, and the second question was pretty clear to who it went.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very good question, and I think, again, there's some progress to be made there. I also kind of relate it a little bit to some of this, online digital training that's been happening much more lately, and then there's always a question of, certification, standardization, recognition. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's a new question either, I mean, in standard education as well, there's a different level of recognition, whether if you've gone to Harvard or if you've gone to XY University. So to me, part of the solution is, again, collaboration and getting some sort of, standardized recognition or certificate or a stamp of approval from the government. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is more, the soft way is making yourself known because your certificate or diploma is actually quite high quality, and then people end up recognizing it over time, right? But for me personally, I also feel like, if you have the skills, they will be recognized once you start doing the job, right? It's just a problem is a bit of a perspective or reputation. But for both of the questions, I mean, we have a member in Bangladesh, so I would be happy to put you guys in touch with our Employers Federation in Bangladesh, and then perhaps you can take this conversation further.
I'll be very brave. No, thank you for your question. And I also don't know where to begin. The reason I say it, there is so much can be done and should be done. But two things I would say. The first thing is supporting young people, the financing mechanism or supporting mechanism should be made more lean. What that I mean is, we cannot expect an youth organization to have all this policy, fiduciary standard, and so on in place and that's what I find in my conversation with young people, that is become really difficult to access some of the support they need. So I think when we expect support, or when the different stakeholders would like to support youth organization, I think they really need to think about what would be an appropriate mechanism to support the youth organization, so that, I mean, without really we are excluding them with setting up certain standards and so on that is impossible for them to actually meet. That's first point. My second point is, instead of reinventing the wheel, I believe there are already certain infrastructure and mechanism in place in Bangladesh, and the TVET has come up repeatedly in the panel as well. How can we really think about revamping our TVET institutions so that it's really up to the need of transition to a green economy? And if I may also say my concluding remark, or you're coming? So I think in all our conversation, what I feel also strongly, when we talk about just transition, it may mean different things to different people. But until and unless, what my, I think, fellow panelist says, the voices of the communities and the people, if they are not part of the process, and if we are not taking into consideration what they really want, we might set up an, huge solar system providing electricity, but it may come at the expense of violating certain rights and may not provide justice to the very people. So I think it's really important. I cannot emphasize it enough for working with communities in Bangladesh, how important they are part of the process, their voices are being incorporated, represented, and they are also part in the implementation process. If that we can make sure, I think the just transition question that we talk about probably could be ensured to some extent. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I would like, if there's one last question, that would be my question to finish, if somebody has still a question to the panel. If not, I would like to thank all the panelists and the Capacity Building Hub for providing this space. And yeah, thank you very much.